I'm honored to introduce Larry Grathwohl again. Larry has been with us at several conferences. I think the only conference he missed was the one on the global jihad, but on almost every other occasion, Larry has come in because of the important work that he did and the important work he's doing now. Larry Grathwohl is a true patriot, a Vietnam veteran who served his country in so many ways, including fighting the communists in Vietnam, but also fighting the communists on American soil, because he was an FBI informant in the Weather Underground. He knows these people as well. He knows the older generation, shall we say, the Ayers and the Dohrns and the Mark Rudds and so forth, who, as I talked about earlier, have formed a group, the Movement for a Democratic Society, grooming another generation of activists, the generation that Brandon Darby was a part of and told you about earlier. So you've got Larry's bio. Please join me in giving him a tremendous round of applause for a great patriot, Larry Grathwohl.
Good morning, everybody. I guess it's afternoon, excuse me. We're eating lunch, aren't we? I want to start by thanking Mr. Darby for his efforts on behalf of our nation. Certainly, it was a real challenge for him, and I appreciate what he did. I'm here today to talk to you about a little different subject. It is currently being reported in many of the Hollywood and cinema blogs that Robert Redford is going to make a movie about the Weather Underground. And as a matter of fact, the production began last month in September. Such familiar names as Susan Sheridan, Julie Christie, Sarandon, Nick Nolte, and Robert Redford himself are reportedly being considered for starring roles in this movie based on a novel by Neil Gordon titled The Company You Keep. It seems clear that this is an attempt to portray a communist terrorist group, the Weather Underground, in a positive light. As such, it fits into the agenda of billionaire George Soros, who has given a public platform or even grants to such Weathermen underground figures as Bernardine Dohrn and Bill Ayers, Linda Evans. It is important to note that Robert Redford's Sundance Institute has received $5 million from the George Soros-funded Open Society Institute. A release at the time of this grant declared the Sundance Institute will receive a $5 million grant for its documentary film program to help raise the awareness on human rights. Soros' henchman, Ari Nir, was quoted as saying, "Films can play a powerful role in inspiring action on human rights, justice, accountability, and other open society issues. The Sundance Institute's work helps filmmakers shed light on the most pressing challenges of our time." That's a quote. So we must conclude that this film, now in the making, will highlight the so-called human rights of terrorists and their protectors. That too represents the bizarre mindset of George Soros and Nair, who have dedicated their lives to making it impossible for law enforcement to use undercover operatives and informants in order to disrupt or destroy terrorist organizations. First, a note about myself. I joined the Army in October of 1964. I became a paratrooper in 1965 and was assigned to the 2nd Battalion of the 502nd Infantry which was part of the 101st Airborne Division. By July, I, along with the 1st Brigade of the 101st, was sent to South Vietnam. I was 17 years old, and I believed that we were there to save the people of South Vietnam from communism and North Vietnamese dominance. The 2nd Battalion of the 502nd Infantry received 2 presidential unit citations while I was assigned to the unit. One citation was for an action at An Ninh in September of 1965, and the other was for an action during Operation Hawthorne in May of 1966. This is unprecedented, as no unit has been cited twice in less than a year. When I returned from Vietnam, I became a drill instructor at Fort Knox. I extended my service for 9 months and was honorably discharged in July of 1968. I had no idea that another fight of an unexpected kind was just 1 year in the future. In 1969, while attending the University of Cincinnati, I encountered members of the then known as the Weathermen faction, of the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS. At first, I was inclined to pay very little attention to these people. I saw them as being violence-prone and crazy. Later, I would meet 2 of these individuals who were distributing literature and asking if we were going to the national action in Chicago to get the pigs. Again, I was inclined to dismiss them and even made a remark that if they wanted to get the pigs, there were lots of them in Cincinnati and they didn't have to go to Chicago to accomplish that. They didn't laugh, but I did. I read the literature they had given me and became more concerned that this group of lunatics actually meant to do what they said they were going to do, attack the city of Chicago. I went to the Cincinnati Police Department and informed them of the individuals I had encountered and their plans for the city of Chicago. I also provided the police with the literature that I had received at the meeting. I was then asked by the Cincinnati Police Department to attend the meetings they had invited me to and to provide whatever information I could regarding the plans the Weathermen had for the national action, which is what they called their planned attack on Chicago. I agreed to do so, and little did I anticipate that I would become the only source of information that went underground with the Weathermen at the end of the year. Mark Rudd even acknowledges this fact in his book, Underground, on page 202. Quote, "Still, Grathwohl was the only known infiltrator ever exposed in the Weathermen organization," end quote. He further states, and I quote again, "Had there been others, the government certainly would have used them to bust us in the years after 1970. My decision to infiltrate the Weathermen organization was based more than anything on their propensity to violence. I found even in the earliest meetings that these people were terrorists, planning for a direct confrontation with authority of any kind, and that their ultimate goal was to destroy the United States and the imposition of totalitarian socialism. From the time of my first meetings and the preparation for the national action, the Weathermen's intentions were evident. We would meet in Eden Park in Cincinnati and practice karate. We would do this for several hours. I thought they believed that if we practiced for 2 or 3 weeks, we could get a black belt. They also split us up into infinity groups. These were 4-man or 5-man groups, and the idea was that our leader would lead us in the Battle of Chicago under the leadership, of course, of the national representatives, which was Bernardine Dohrn, Mark Rudd, Jeff Jones, and Bill Ayers. The intention was to prepare us for an assault on the city of Chicago. and it was stated time and again, if the pigs don't attack us, then we will attack them. There was no way for me to interpret this activity and these statements as anything other than the intentional violence. The Weathermen intended to do exactly what they said they were going to do, and they did, resulting in Richard Elrod's being paralyzed from the neck down, not to mention the extensive damage done to property of all types. Oops. When the Weathermen returned to Cincinnati after the national action, they contacted me and I again began to attend meetings, and my infiltration of the organization really began. At this point, I went to the FBI, believing that they were better equipped to deal with an organization such as the Weathermen. There were meetings and activities that I had to attend as I rose through the ranks. In one instance, I was tested when LSD was passed out, and then I underwent a self-criticism session. This was meant to determine if I was really committed to the Weathermen. This is referred to in Mark Rudd's book as the acid test. And I can say that it was very intense and lasted several hours. I did not take the acid. I palmed it and put it in my pocket. It's a good thing because there was several other people who obviously didn't take the acid too. They were the ones that led the criticism session. In the end, I responded in the appropriate manner, as I was then fully accepted as a dedicated and committed revolutionary, or more appropriately, a terrorist. It was then that I was asked to move into the collective and to work full-time as a Weatherman. I can tell you that it was an abnormal existence with little, if any, personal hygiene and cleanliness. These people would go for days, if not weeks, without bathing. Most of the time, the apartments were cold as the utilities had been turned off. Sometimes we went for several days without eating, as the collective had little money. Meetings and strategy sessions were held every day, and attendance was mandatory. It was simply an ugly way to live. But the Weathermen thought they were rejecting everything middle class, never considering the effect this behavior was having on their ability to accomplish their goal of becoming revolutionaries and domestic terrorists. Later, when the group went underground, this would be recognized and the lifestyle changed. The fact that I was able to infiltrate this terrorist organization becomes important when considering that I was the only one to successfully do so. The Weather Underground, as they came to be known, was significantly affected on April the 15th, 1970, when I facilitated the arrest of Linda Evans and Dion Dongi. Apparently, Mark Rudd was supposed to be at the same meeting. He was in a restaurant next door to the one I met Linda Evans in. And unfortunately, the FBI just missed him. On that day, I was also arrested in an effort to maintain my cover and credibility with the Weathermen. I spent 2 days in jail in New York City. I knew this was going to blow my cover, and I attempted to convince the FBI that this was not the time to arrest these people. I believed, and Mark Rudd confirms this, that given more time, I would have been able to effect the arrest of more Weathermen and to possibly bring the organization to its knees. My attempts were ignored, and I was told that the decision to make this arrest had been made at the highest level, meaning J. Edgar Hoover himself. I can say now, as I did then, that this arrest was a mistake, and that with a little more time would have resulted in greater rewards. I believe I would have wiped out the leadership collective if I'd have been given a few more days. With that background, you can now understand how outraged I am over the planned Weather Underground film planned by Robert Redford and his Soros-funded backers. The story they are using is about an individual named Jason Sinai, who participated in a bank robbery which goes wrong. I thought all bank robberies were wrong. But according to this book, that's not the case. That took place in 1974, and after 30 years, his cover has been blown by a reporter who is trying to make a name for himself. In order to protect his family, this terrorist fugitive must flee his home and family and take to the road, where he is forced to make contact with former members of the Weather Underground and other terrorist organizations of that era. It's interesting to note the very close similarities between the story Neil Gordon has woven into this novel and the bombings and other criminal acts committed by the Weather Underground during the late 60s and the early 70s. Kathy Bodine and David Gilbert were members of the Weather Underground who, together with members of the Black Liberation Army, robbed a Brinks truck in New Jersey, and a guard and 2 police officers were murdered. According to Bill Ayers, Bernardine Dohrn was the person who placed the bomb at the Park Police Station in San Francisco in 1970 that resulted in the death of Police Sergeant Brian McDonald. That's his picture over there. And yet they continue to claim that the Weathermen never killed anybody or harmed anyone. It's also important to remember the numerous other bombings that took place, including the New York City Police Headquarters, the United States Capitol Building, and the Pentagon. It appears that Robert Redford is going to make a movie that not only downplays the act of terrorism committed by this group, but also makes them appear to be heroes and good Americans. Such phrases as a sweeping American saga about sacrifice, using violent action and inflammatory rhetoric to protest the Vietnam War. Doesn't it just get you right here? Maybe I meant here. And various other social issues are examples of this movie's planned depiction of the Weather Underground and its acts of terrorism against life and property. Somehow these terrorists and murderers are transformed into real Americans who stood for their beliefs, defending their country's ideals. Now, this is in the book, okay? I'm not making this up. These are quotes. In one chapter, a character named Benjamin Schuckberg, who happens to be a reporter, begins a rant in justification of the violence involved in the Weather Underground's violent activities. One comment this reporter states in regards to the protest against the Vietnam War, that the state, meaning the government, is beating you up and putting you in jail, and it doesn't listen to any explanations. Now that's what this reporter's saying about our country during that era. This statement ignores the fact that many of those protesters of that time were attacking people and property. They were the ones doing violence. Violence was their message. In another instance, Benjamin continues, and I quote, "Just imagine the choice. On one hand, between this jolly, unhealthy, vile, lying SOB, Nixon, with his horrid little sidekicks, and on the other hand, this vast movement throughout the country where people, this is wonderful, where people are not just getting laid and getting high and listening to fine music and having fun, but to boot, they're right. Huh? Now, I can tell you from my experience, what I really enjoyed was the fine music. Okay? I find this statement to be amazing, and I'm not kidding you, just amazing. With the total condemnation of President Nixon, while making it sound as if the tuned-in, dropped-out generation wasn't in the streets attacking anything. I remember running through the streets of Washington, D.C. in November of 1969 with the Weathermen breaking windows and throwing garbage cans over and setting them on fire. I believe we even set a couple of police cars on fire. But we weren't doing that in this book. Anyway, while making it sound as if the tuned-in, dropped-out generation wasn't in the streets attacking anything and everything in their path, but were just trying to have fun with sex, dope, and fine music. And remember, I like the fine music. Later, as Benjamin continues his rant, he says, the fact is, Weather, and he's referring to the Weather Underground, was making a last-ditch protest against the government that refused to obey the Constitution. And now he's referring to McVeigh, the guy who blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City, was protesting a government for obeying the Constitution. I mean, I can't, but I guess there's logic in it. Neil Gordon thought there was. Right? All Weather was saying was that this government has to follow what the Constitution says. This is Benjamin talking about the Weathermen again. This is simply not true. What I just said was his quote. Now I'm saying this is simply not true, as the Weather Underground made several statements declaring war on the United States and its people, met with many enemies of the United States, and called for the total destruction of what they referred to as U.S. imperialism. I was there. I heard this stated time and time again. Our purpose wasn't to end the war in Vietnam. Our purpose was to bring the war home. And Bernardine Dohrn at the National Council meeting clearly stated that. Their violent activities cannot be disputed, and their claims that they never injured or killed anyone are simply lies. For Mr. Redford to glorify this group of terrorist traitors is beyond comprehension and shouldn't be allowed to happen. I have made several attempts to contact Mr. Redford in an effort to enlighten him as to what the Weather Underground's real purposes and goals were during that time. So far, my efforts have failed, and while I realize that this movie is based on a novel, it is still utilizing real criminal acts committed by individuals who comprise the membership of the Weather Underground. Bernardine Dohrn, in her first communication from the Weather Underground, stated, and I quote, "This is a declaration of war against the United States." I sat in meetings with many members of the Weather Underground, including Bill Ayers, and discussed plans to bomb places, buildings with the sole purpose of causing as much death and destruction as possible. The Weather Underground wasn't trying to end the war in Vietnam, but rather to bring the war home to the United States. Their avowed purpose was clearly stated in many communiques throughout the years, and that was to overthrow the government of the United States and create a communist or socialist society for the people of this country. If necessary, they were ready and willing to kill as many as 25 million people in order to achieve their goal. I actually sat in meetings where these people discussed the logistics of eliminating 25 million people. That's what they thought they would have to do after they seized power. It's hard to believe that someone who has made their fortune entertaining America has forgotten the trauma and the fear the Weather Underground created 40 years ago. How Robert Redford can allow himself to be used in such a way is a disgrace. Bill Ayers, who has stated that his only regret is that they didn't do enough, is now to be changed from an unrepentant domestic terrorist to a good American, courtesy of Hollywood and George Soros. We must expose this dastardly attempt at filmmaking and highlight the political agenda of the Soros-funded groups which are still working to undermine our law enforcement agencies. The Weather Underground could not have existed without the support of organizations such as the National Lawyers Guild, a Communist Party front organization. Today, the NLG and its sister organization, the Center for Constitutional Rights, actively work to undermine our intelligence and police agencies. They provide legal and other support to the Occupy Wall Street protesters. We need more, not less, informants in these groups, and I wish to salute Brandon Darby for breaking with his left-wing comrades and working for the FBI inside one of the anarchist organization caught planning violence for the 2008 Republican National Convention. I know what he's up against. I've been there. After my experience working with the FBI and after testifying before the Senate, 3 federal grand juries, as well as the trial of Mark Felt and Ed Miller, I was subjected to threats and accusations regarding my activities with the FBI and my personal character. On a wanted poster found by an FBI agent in Berkeley, California, I was wanted for crimes against the people. Additionally, it was stated that, and I quote, Grathwohl has been identified by weatherwoman Linda Evans as a pig infiltrator. He has lived in collectives in New York, New Haven, and Cincinnati. Thursday morning, he turned up in Berkeley, end quote. Also included on the wanted poster was the following statement, quote, caution, this man is dangerous. He advocated the use of explosives in firearms. They didn't. I did. And he is known to be a heavy user of speed. Of course, this wanted poster has a picture of me taken at the time of the and notice that I have also been accused of being a drug user. Another slam on my character. Later, an article would appear in a newspaper claiming that I was a heavy user of Reds. I have no idea what Reds are in the drug world, but I can only tell you that I used to carry around, I don't know if you've seen them, the little cinnamon candies, right? No, not Tic Tacs, they're the little red things, Red Hots. Well, I'm addicted to those things. If someone set a bag down here and opened it up, I'd eat the whole bag. And I'm not serious. I could walk away and come back, and before we left here, it would be gone. And I used to carry these cinnamon candies around in a plastic bag. And I would ask people, do you want some Reds? That's what I've always called them all of my life. So I guess there's something sinister there, right? Anyway, I admit that I was addicted to that candy and still am. And I'll eat a whole bag of them in one sitting, and now I try to keep them out of my reach because I'm not kidding. My daughter bought a bag of them last Christmas, and in less than 24 hours they were all gone, and I mean a big bag. And there was only one person eating them. That was me. My hand was red. There was also an article that appeared in an underground newspaper called the Berkeley Tribe in August 1970, which occupied 2 pages. and is titled Unsettled Accounts. Underneath the headline, it's stated, Larry Grathwohl is one of the most dangerous police agents to ever infiltrate the American Revolutionary Movement. Ooh. The substance of the article is extremely negative, ending with, agents like Larry Grathwohl are viciously effed up. The only thing we can want is to have them wiped out like the poisonous vipers they are, without leaving them or the government that controls them the smallest chance to strike back. I believe that this can leave little doubt as to what these people wanted to see happen to me. The truth didn't matter. The only important facts were that I tried to prevent Weathermen violence and the death and injury of many innocent people. Not only do we need the ability of the FBI and police agents to infiltrate these groups, like Brandon did, but I also encourage the House and the Senate to create new congressional committees and subcommittees to investigate potential terrorist organizations nationally and internationally, and to provide advice and direction to federal and local law enforcement agencies. That means that the House and Senate should reestablish committees or subcommittees on the internal security and un-American activities. I believe that every citizen of the United States has the right to free speech and assembly. I also believe that when these individuals plan and prepare violent attacks on individuals, government buildings, and property, that is no longer a constitutionally protected privilege. It is breaking the law and threatening the lives of innocent people. The U.S. government has an obligation for the common defense. Every political figure swears an oath to protect our Constitution and the people from enemies, foreign and domestic. It is time for Congress to do its job. Congress can begin by investigating the Obama administration links to the Occupy Wall Street movement and related mobs, which include assorted Marxist, communist, socialist, anarchist. Let this be a teaching moment as to how the violence of the 1960s and 70s that I witnessed firsthand can return with a vengeance. Let's hope that we act and stop this madness before it's too late. That's my prepared statement. I'm going to add just one little thing. I've been doing research on Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn's activities with Occupy Wall Street. They're heavily involved. There was a clip on Fox News several days ago depicting Bill Ayers at the Chicago Occupy Wall Street giving advice and guidance on what they should do and how to do it. Bernardine writes about attending the Occupy Wall Street in New York City, and she's coming up out of the subway and walking 2 blocks down Broadway, and all of a sudden she sees this wonderful sight, and she starts to describe it, and God, I wanted to get on a plane and go move in, you know. It sounded like a great place to live. And it probably will be until the winter comes and it starts snowing. You can go to Bill Ayers' website. It's billayers.wordpress.com. And he's got articles on there. And as an example, he wrote one article that is supposed to be the political statement. Here it is. It says, Occupy Wall Street, ! Collective statement of the protesters. It's several pages long, and basically he runs a diatribe on the United States. You know, we're really bad people. All we want is money and to see the poor people suffer. And you know, they've got to follow through with this. They're the 99%. And that's what kind of scares me about them. If they have the support that they claim they do, they may be a much bigger threat than they were back in the 60s. That's all I
Yeah, we'll take them.